This episode is brought to you by Homes for Our Troops, a nonprofit helping build and donate homes to injured post 9/11 veterans. Visit hfotusa.org for more information. And welcome to another Fast Take. I'm Rod Rodriguez.
I'm Jack Murphy.
And last week we had a great conversation with a returning guest, Dr. David Walton. The first time Dr. Walton was on the show, he was talking about dispelling really some of the myths behind Special Forces assessment and selection. A lot of the old heads, of course, the last hard class was my class kind of mentality. And Walton really came forward and kind of blew that stuff out of the water, proving that Special Forces assessment and selection is still as tough as ever, but it's just very different. And a lot of new science and research is helping to make that course the premier course for weeding out folks who simply don't fit the SF mold. Jack, this was your second interview with Dr. Walton, still talking about Special Forces and assessment and selection, but from a different angle. What was your takeaway from that conversation?
Well, yeah, I mean, so our first conversation was, sort of dispelling some of the myths that Special Forces selection has gone soft. And then the second one was more talking about his work, trying to, coach, teach, and mentor younger soldiers who are considering going to Special Forces selection. And so he talks about, what really goes on there, how it works to the extent that he's able to, and how to prepare for it. One of the biggest takeaways, I think the biggest takeaway is that as much as things change, they stay the same. I mean, a lot of the obstacles and a lot of the team week stuff is really the same stuff that I did, in, oh my gosh, well, we're talking about 18 years ago, I guess, at this point. Some of the Special Forces retired guys I speak to, they went through it in the 80s and they did the same damn obstacles I did, the same obstacles that kids are doing today in 2023. They're still doing land nav out on the Star Course. They're still doing these horrendous team events where you have to carry 600-pound sandbag on an improvised stretcher. So, as much as things change, they stay the same.
I think it's funny. Whenever anybody talks about SFAS, the down pilot, the 600-pound sandbag, Sandman, that always comes up. And it's funny because you said it best, an improvised stretcher. And I think people think a stretcher. And I'm like, no. Imagine big, thick lead pipes that you would buy at Home Depot to build a house with, and some rope and a poncho. Good luck. And you're going to cover some terrible, I was going to use a potty word here, but in the interest of editing, you're going to cover some terrible terrain, some sand, some not so level terrain with your team.
I had actually blocked that event out of my mind pretty much until it was actually an interview with Chris Miller, who mentioned that doing that event back, I guess he went through, it must've been like the late 80s or something like that. And suddenly it all kind of came screaming back into my mind about like the soft sand, and you're each taking turns, with the pole over your back, carrying this duffel bag full of sand. And like, I remember tripping over, falling face first, and then somebody else comes and takes it and he trips and you jump back on it. And it just goes on like that for like, I don't know, all freaking morning into the afternoon.
It feels like it takes hours and hours. It probably wasn't that long, but and that's the thing, that's something that I really appreciated from that interview. Dr. Walton was talking about the rucksack, that all of your decisions are going to happen with 80 pounds plus
right
resting on your back. And that's something that I think is lost on a lot of folks when they talk about assessment and selection in any branch. They talk about SEALs at the MARSOC, Special Forces, Pararescue. There's a lot of courses out there, and you see them. You just Google it once, and folks, I promise, your Facebook, your Instagram, and your whatever social media, the feed is going to be full of ads and stuff for, subscribe to this workout plan. You're going to be amazing. You can lift as much weights as you want. You could be as big and as strong looking, and you can have like a beach body and look, rugged as the next, GQ or is it those muscle fitness magazines. The simple fact is there is something about that weight on your back that just depletes your mind and your body and your soul. You don't know how good of a decision maker you are until you are fatigued, until you're hungry, until you're wet, until you're tired. And there's no putting that rucksack down. Nobody's taking that. You're not allowed to take that thing off. All you can do is readjust the straps and hope some of it sits on your hips, some of it sits on your shoulders. I mean, I've seen dudes like scrunch in the middle to see if they can move some of that tension to the inside of their shoulders, outside of their shoulders. I mean, the psychological effect of being uncomfortable and in a constant state of pain can't be understated.
Yeah, man. I mean, not to like go into the war stories, but like I had like an open wound on my back most of the time through SFAS because that metal, external rucksack frame was just cutting into my back and cutting into my back and got worse and worse every day. My feet were bleeding and, my feet increased in size. One of my knees looked like the size of a grapefruit by the time I finished. And I think what really gets lost is that people don't understand that it's an endurance event over 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks, something like that. So like any single event in SFAS, like I could go and do it today. I mean, I could do one of those team events today. I could go do the Nasty Nick today. I could go do rifle PT or log PT today. And I mean, that's fine, but it's the culmination of of all of these things day after day after day after day. I don't think I could do that today at all.
No,
at all.
Exactly,
But any single event, I mean, is not like a huge challenge. It's not like a big deal.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, over the course of like weeks and weeks of doing two or three events a day, I mean, it just wears you down.
And I think that's the point, isn't it? It's not about who you are right now. It's who you are when you have been worn down to a nub.
Right.
Who's that guy? And I tell folks all the time, even if you're not sure about special forces, but if you want to see who you are, and you really want to take a hard look at what you're made of, it's a great place to find out.
Yeah,
because I discovered a lot about myself. And I didn't even get selected. And I still would encourage people to go because I came back and I was like, wow, I know me. I got a good hard look at me. And it's funny, and maybe you can relate to this, but as you grow older, the kid that went through that experience is better. You're a better person for it. And you bounce a lot of your current experiences off of that. Like the lessons you learned, you take those and you start compounding other life lessons on top of that. And you're like, oh, I can do X, Y, and Z. I know what I'm capable of.
Right.
Let's go further. I think that I would probably be less of a person had I not had that experience.
Yeah. I mean, between so going through RIP, the Ranger indoctrination, which I recycled the first time, by the way. Character
God, you're such
experience.
A piece of crap. Oh my God.
Well, then I also recycled Ranger School. So I was a hard learner. But those are character building experiences. Yeah. You get kicked in the nuts and like, what do you do in that moment? Right. Like, do you get back up or do you just throw in the towel? And then SFAS, I came off of a deployment to Iraq and went right into it without any like train up. And yes, you will learn your limits, even if you think you're a young stud and some kind of badass. No, you learn what your physical and mental limits are. And I hit both in SFAS. I mean, I was just mentally, physically, spiritually exhausted by the time I got to the end of it. But yeah, no, they're good courses. That they all are.
Were you surprised by the findings that Dr. Walton revealed concerning soldiers' preparation for land nav?
You mean that they weren't preparing anymore? That they were
exactly
going into it? I think it's an interesting finding. I think that when we're talking about, let's say, entry level soldiers, lieutenants in 18 X-rays. So that actually, no, you don't have really lieutenants so much. No, you do have lieutenants because they're promotable to become captains. So we're talking about young officers and young enlisted guys through the 18 X-ray program. None of them have had that much experience with land navigation previously. If you think in basic training, like what do you get, a day of land nav? Now, if you go to SOPC as an 18 X-ray, I guess you probably get quite a bit of land nav training there. But then, I mean, look, it depending on what kind of unit you're in, you may get very little land navigation training. So yeah, at that point, it does become incumbent on soldiers to kind of supplement that with their own training, joining an orienteering program or something like what David Walton does, in the Fort Bragg area. But no, I guess I'm not necessarily surprised, like you're talking about young soldiers. They're not necessarily experts in any specific thing, whether it's marksmanship or land navigation or whatever the skill is.
Yeah. And that's something that it's interesting. You can practice rucking. You put your ruck together, slap it on your back and, put your headphones on, which again, it kind of goes back to, I like David Goggins' idea of like, if you're going to run, no headphones, you're going to ruck, no headphones, because you're not going to have them when the crap hits the fan. Learn to deal with the voices in your head kind of thing. But you can do all of these preparatory actions. But the one thing that, to Dr. Walton's point, thing that's going to pass or fail you most likely is going to be land nav, is not something you just pick up and go do. Even if you're at a major military installation, most of these land nav courses are on training area that units have to go reserve. They have the huge thing that you got to go do in order to use it. You have to have the keys and facilities. It's not something any Joe that's going to be like, hey, this weekend, I'm going to go do this land nav course. Like, no, not necessarily. So I wonder if that isn't an indicator to maybe the rest of the military, like, hey, we need to be able to set up publicly accessible or public to the military service member.
It's the same thing. Same with marksmanship, right? It's soldiers to not just jump out to the range and shoot, the way they should be, or airborne operations, or any of these sorts of things that you do as an infantryman. And I think that's why there's in some ways such a big emphasis, some may argue an overemphasis on physical fitness training, because it's maybe the one thing you do have control over. You can go to the gym anytime you want. You can do push-ups in your barracks room, but a lot of these other skills, yeah, just as you say, there's all this like planning and that goes into it. And some of those ranges are reserved 18 to 24 months ahead of time. I mean, so yeah, I used to be the guy who had to do that as an 18 Bravo. Not fun. But hey, man, all this SF stuff's great. But hey, let's get some goss going about Special Operations Forces Week down in Tampa that we were both at.
Oh boy, soft week. I loved it. I this was my third soft week. Soft week. This is my third soft week, and I think it's interesting because you get industry out there. It's a big industry conference, and something people get confused. It is not a U.S. Special Operations industry week. It is a Special Operations industry week. Like, everyone's there from every country. You get representatives showing up. You got different uniforms there, looking at the latest wears and tear from everybody, hawking something new. But one thing that's interesting to me about this is you can start getting a feel for what industry thinks SOF is going to need in the next couple of years by what they're showing a lot of. And in the past, I noticed it was like really cool guns and optics, dune buggies, and it was very Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan focused. This SOF week seemed to be very focused on submersibles, technology that's underwater. I saw somebody was like talking about, like, had a company like, oh, we can do Wi-Fi underwater now, which is dope because I love to swim and I'd love to have my headphones on commercially. Let's rock that thing out. But you start looking at drones that can go into the water, out of the water, and go flying.
I noticed a bunch of stuff focused on the Arctic.
Arctic,
selling stuff to use above the Arctic Circle or in winter conditions. companies from Norway and things like this. And you did not see that. I mean, I haven't been to this event in probably 6 or 7 years. But I mean, I don't recall seeing any of that stuff previously.
And there wasn't that much stuff. And the other thing that I thought was really interesting is the use of AI. A lot of companies are promoting their leverage of AI into what their company's doing. There's a company that was promoting their ability to do background checks or to determine your potential vulnerabilities using voice recognition AI software. So if we want to determine if Jack Murphy's a threat to national security, he would sit and talk with this AI for 6 minutes. And they claim to have a high, like in the 90 percentiles of success in determining whether or not he could be a threat to national security, or if we need to not grant him his access.
And that doesn't sound like a total pseudoscience. So this is a little rant that I have is like, let's not take any company's pitch deck at face value and think that that's the future, right? So these are commercial companies, and they will tell you we get 100% results every time, and this thing has stealth baked into it, and it'll make you fucking waffles in the desert and all this other stuff. And I mean, AI is a technology that's going to change the landscape of future conflicts. I don't doubt that, but I think we should all be a little careful as people see this big cash cow on the horizon. I was telling you earlier about somebody at one of the panels talking about quantum, and it was just so clear that this dude had no idea what quantum was. It was just a word. It's just a word we're going to use, and we're going to hope if we use that word enough, somebody, is dumb enough to dump $50 million on us. So, I mean, yeah, you see, I mean, there's definitely I'm not trying to like downgrade or be dismissive of technologies, because it's really important, but the pitch deck may not, like buying a timeshare in Florida itself. You may arrive and find it's not quite what you paid for.
It's never quite what you paid for, but it's true. You're 100% right. I mean, anytime you go to an industry conference, you have to understand that everybody there is trying to sell something to someone. They're trying to sell services, equipment, technology, dreams and hopes and aspirations. There's companies out there that are simply selling an idea, and they need investment money to make that idea potentially come true, or it won't come to fruition. You'll just discover that you invested in a boondoggle. But there are times when you're going to see this stuff like AI driven, machine learning, blockchain, crypto. Okay. You're throwing out buzzwords here.
Right.
Right. And if you do it in a loud enough tone, in the right cadence, you too can be Gary Vaynerchuk. You too can be Tony Robbins. You can sit on the stage and be like, if you're not investing in, name X technology of the flavor of the week, then you're 10 years behind everyone else. Okay, well, tell me, how does that NFT work for you? How did the NFT work out for you? What's the value of your Bored Ape right now? Homes for Our Troops, HFOT, is a publicly funded nonprofit organization that builds and donates specially adapted custom homes nationwide for severely injured post 9/11 veterans to enable them to rebuild their lives. These homes restore some of the freedom and independence our veterans sacrifice while defending our country. Nearly 90 cents out of every dollar spent has gone directly to supporting our veterans and enabling them to rebuild their lives. Visit hfotusa.org. That's hfotusa.org to learn more.
I sat in on a few of the panels at Soft Week, and kind of disappointed, to tell you the truth, because some of the people on these panels were like, I have no doubt in my mind, are very smart people. I mean, former and current commanders of special operations elements, people who serve in, pretty high ranking national security positions. But the conversation never advanced beyond anything that was it was just childishly superficial, people speaking in cliches, giving sort of non-answers to things. I mean, I heard one officer said soft does kinetic things but also does other things. Another person up there talked about getting reps in, and I mean, it's like very like just sort of superficial fluff that says essentially nothing. And I'm sure these people actually have a lot to say and are very smart, but I mean, there's a lot of those panels were kind of a waste of time, to tell you the truth. And I mean, if your goal is to say nothing, then I would argue don't have a panel.
I think that it's tough. I mean, I will give SOCOM and its leadership that benefit of a doubt that I don't think they intend for stuff to sound like that. I mean, of course, it's not. They're kind of held, the people you invite are the people that you invite. They're going to say what they're going to say in the way that they say it. A panel talking about special operations and the future of warfare and all that stuff. The level of the balance that you have to strike between OPSEC and really saying what's on your mind. I see the political weight that is on some of these guys' shoulders, but at the same time, a lot of these industry folks, the commercial folks, that weight isn't necessarily as heavy or as prominent on their shoulders. They could probably speak a little less commercially.
Well,
you know what I mean?
I understand, of course, that they have to dance around classification in a lot of cases. But still, there's plenty of stuff on the unclassified, special operations forces capabilities and past missions or whatever that I would expect them to be able to articulate in a sort of cognizant manner. I mean, I would expect them, if they're going to have a panel that speaks about the geopolitics of a region, I would expect them to sound somewhat familiar with them. And when they don't, it's not a great look.
Yeah, maybe they got to do a little more screening. Like, hey, if you're going to talk on this, we need to see your draft.
Yeah,
maybe that's what it is.
I mean, maybe I was like coming to it from the wrong perspective or something like that. Because I mean, maybe the point is just for like a self-admiration society or something like that. Because
God, you're so negative. God.
Well, I mean, the way these people like get up and they get a bunch of bro hugs and stuff like that, and it's like who is the audience, and maybe that's the reality. Is like the audience isn't me. Maybe that's just the reality.
I mean, I think that's a mature approach to look at it from too. And I don't think you're completely off in both respects, but the audience is not you or I. We're not the audience. The audience is really investors, folks that have technology and some type of
industry
investment.
People.
Yeah, they have skin in the financial government space game. You and I, we don't. I mean, from your perspective, journalist, you're there for story. That's not story. That's forward-facing, pre-approved messaging. And to your point, the bro hugs and the Gary Vaynerchuk style of talking nonsense. And I'm not necessarily blaming them for that. I would say that in a way, that's kind of what the venue is kind of set to do to an extent.
Right.
I find that events like this are really driven around read between the lines. And I think you saw that too. There's a lot of stuff that people say that it's you can't take it at face value. You really have to read between the lines and go, oh, that's what they're talking about. Or I think I know where we're going with this conversation. You want like you said, you're definitely walking a fine line and you're trying to hint and tiptoe around certain things. But what I really got out of it was the ability to see what the future is going to look like. To me, I think Soft Week is like, it's like it's like the World Expo. Remember those from like when you were a kid growing up, the World Expos in like 1945, World of the Future, that kind of thing. It's really kind of World Expo for soft. and we get to see some really cool technology. I mean, I got to see a real dog go lose its mind barking at the robot dog, which I thought was absolutely hilarious. My money is still on that Belgian Malinois. I don't think that robot dog stood a chance. But I will tell you that that robot dog looks significantly different and better than the one last year and then the one before that one. And I think that's kind of like what I took away from it is like, if you go to enough of these, you start seeing the evolution of technology. We went from dune buggies to this is how we can keep your special operators warm and comfortable in, Arctic conditions. This radio can stand up to, 120 below zero or whatever. Those are interesting things that you look at that technology and go, well, who's asking for that? What's out there? Which Arctic are we covering? Because, the Russians claiming parts of the Arctic. We know that there are precious minerals. There's oil. There's aliens. That's right, folks. I don't care. I'll say it. There's aliens in the Arctic, I think, maybe, hopefully. Whatever. There's, we're going to be fighting for these things. I was just talking about this with my Army Reserve troops about, my observations from Soft Week. But the ODNI, the Department of the Director of National Intelligence, the 2023 ODNI report on intelligence threats just got released, and it's a fascinating read, folks. It's a very fascinating read. We're talking Russia, Ukraine, China. And one of the things that really stuck out to me about that report was how, and I'm trying to make sure I word this correctly, in the event that China feels threatened by U.S. or Western aggression, it is not likely, it is imminent, an attack on our infrastructure will occur, a cyber attack on our infrastructure. And the way that this was written, again, you got to read between the lines. You really have to look at this and go, what is the tone? They're trying to be professional. They're trying to be straightforward, but there's also a grave tone to this. There's a notion that I get this impression that the writer is not confident in our ability to withstand these attacks, that maybe our infrastructure is not ready for that level of cyber aggression. And what does that mean to the general public? What does a cyber attack against our infrastructure mean? What happens? And I was telling one of my troops, I said, you know what? Imagine a foreign actor just took LA rush hour in a 10 by 10 kilometer block and said, all lights green. That's it. Just all lights green. What happens? Chaos. People get hurt. How much money? How much, millions of dollars in damages. But the fear that they can do that, even if they could only do it they're one and done. We figured it out and we could patch up all of our lights across the country. But you do it once. Once might be enough to strike enough fear to change the political support for a war. It could scare people. It could push them to be more aggressive if that's what their intent is. Those are real challenges. And then when you take stuff like what you're reading in the ODNI report, and then you take that to your soft week experience, you start connecting those dots. And that's what I was like, oh, well, this is interesting. a little scary, but interesting. Jack, you did Soft Week. We had a great time. We got to sit down and chit chat. You've talked with Dr. Walton. So what's next for you? Are you going to start your own, so you want to be your former soft guy? You want to be an investigative journalist? Come take my 10-week masterclass.
I'm just going to dive right into VC, bro. I'm going to do VC now. Anybody can do it. All you got to do is Oh, you just got to talk really fast and state a bunch of opinions as if they're facts until somebody's dumb enough to shower, make it rain on you.
Blockchain, artificial intelligence, folks. Buy Pepe coin. I'm just kidding, folks. Do not buy Pepe coin. What's next on the military matters docket for you? What's coming up next? What are you working on?
We got an interview I did with Dan Green, who is also a veteran, and he's written a couple books, and one of them is all about global war on terror veterans. So that's coming up. I have an interview with actually an old Ranger buddy of mine who wrote a book about military AI. So that's coming up. And
which goes right in hand with what we're talking about. Like maybe he can shed some light on this.
He definitely can. I mean, he is like an actual expert on this topic, I think. And then another interview about veterans that are helping to repatriate the remains of World War II veterans back to the United States.
It's funny. We don't talk enough about that. The efforts that go into bringing people home from wars that are long.
Yeah, there's a whole agency called DPAA, taxpayer funded organization that does that. And then there, of course, there are, not-for-profits and so on that sometimes get involved as well.
Well, Jack, can't wait to listen to some of these really cool interviews. So far, we've had a pretty banger year. 2023 is shaping up to be pretty good. And folks, what I need from you is some suggestions. We were just talking about, we had a great interview with Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson. We opened up the season with a really cool interview. I got to check a little block off my bucket list. But is there anybody you guys want to hear from? Is there somebody you want us to talk to? And what do you want us to talk to him about? I mean, you can't be like, well, I want you to talk to, Jake Gyllenhaal, because he has a really interesting movie about Afghanistan, which is, based on some cool stories, but nothing, true, completely true. But I'm always interested. I want to hear who you guys want us to talk to, what stories you want us to cover. As always, you can reach us here, Military Matters at stripes.com, or you can reach out to Jack. Jack has a super secret way of communication. It's highly secure. It is, what is it? Proton email. What is it, Jack?
Oh, my Proton mail. Well, that is Jack Murphy, reporter at protonmail.com.
There you go. So if you got a juicy whistleblowing situation, you can just hit him up directly and he will take care of you. Slide right into there. You can slide into his DMs on Twitter. He is Jack Murphy RGR. You got to give him credit, folks. I mean, he's just consistent across the board. And you can always find me at RodPodRod. And we also make sure you're following us on all the socials. That really helps us out. That really keeps the show going afloat. And make sure you're telling folks about Military Matters. It means the world to us that we get a chance to cover these interesting stories about the Department of Defense, the military, service members, veterans, the support network around this wonderful group of people. Until the next, before I go, make sure you're using our promo code, folks. If you go to stripes.com, you can check out the digital subscription, 50% off if you use promo code podcast. I keep forgetting to promote our own stuff. Like, that's important. I'm surprised my editor hasn't beaten me up too bad for that. But anyways, I'm Rod Rodriguez. That was Jack Murphy, and we will see you at the next episode. This episode was brought to you by Homes for Our Troops, a nonprofit helping build and donate homes to injured post 9/11 veterans. Visit hfotusa.org for more information.